fun is just beginning.
More vampires?
Not just vampires. The next threat we face may be something quite different.
I can hardly wait.
We've done the first 6 episodes individually. Now we are going to talk about them as one unit. This is one thing that dawned on me as I started to analyze the show. That it is divided into sections, where batches of episodes, 5 or 6, can be distinguished as a unit that deals with its own set of themes and represents a certain growth. The first half of Season 1 is such a section.
I'm a bit fuzzy, however, on the details. It may be that you can wrest some information from that dread machine. That was a bit, British, wasn't it?
Welcome to the new world.
This is one of the main themes of this section. The show is welcoming us to a new world in more ways than one. A lot more than one. Even this little snippet contains within it 2 aspects of it. One is an age-old interpretation. Europe and America are called the Old World and the New World, respectively, and occasionally we hear the British Giles make snide remarks about America that sometimes get reciprocated by the impudent American kids. But this is just friendly banter. These 2 worlds are at peace. The other interpretation is the new world of the internet, which the kids were already getting acclimated to, but for adults was still a wonder and a dread. It would take time before boomers like Giles would learn to live in peace with the web, and with the personal computer. Those who were from previous generations usually never did. But there are more substantial aspects to this statement. Welcome to a New World also invited us to a television show the likes of which we never experienced before. This became possible, first of all, due to a revolution in television watching habits.
Today it's all gangs and drugs and those movies on Showtime with the nudity. I don't have cable, I only heard.
Cable TV has actually been around since television broadcasting began, in the 1940s. But it became popular only during the 80s, and by the 90s was everywhere. Until then, most people watched only the big national networks, which were heavily regulated and limited in what they could show. Cable channels, which people could individually choose to connect to, had more freedom. Principal Flutie, here, is acting like a regular culture guardian, those who believe that it is fine for art to have nudity, but not for popular mediums, because popular mediums are consumed by the boorish masses and the kids, those who can't control their impulses like we civilized people can. Therefore, if you show things that appeal to their base urges, it will lead them to gangs and drugs. What these culture guardians fail to realize is that every so-called artistic medium started out as a popular medium, and its greatest years were when it was still considered pop, but already drawing creative people who find ways to use it for artistic expression. At some point, the medium starts to be regarded as high art, and then it develops a snobbish attitude, and cleans itself of everything that is considered vulgar, like sex, violence, lowbrow humor, horror, suspense, and so forth. As a result, the medium becomes culturally irrelevant, stops drawing in creative forces, and becomes confined to closed spaces where its aficionados convene to relive its glorious past, whine that there's no good art anymore, and bitch about those vulgar popular mediums that are corrupting the masses and the children. The rise of cable in the 90s allowed creative people, like Joss Whedon, to start thinking of TV as an art form, and he pitched the unprecedented concept of combining horror with a high school show, and turning traditional supernatural themes into metaphors for the trials and tribulations of youth. This idea seemed doomed, for several reasons. First of all, horror shows were not really a thing on TV. Shows that dealt with horror were usually anthology series, in which every episode was a standalone short story, or satirical sitcoms like The Addams Family or The Munsters. Bringing horror into a high school show, which were always either fun teen comedy or realistic teen drama, was crazier still. Cable may have been more daring than national TV networks, but the executives were still thinking along old lines, and rejected the notion. Fortunately, when the WB network was left with a hole in its broadcasting schedule, due to a mid-season cancellation, it decided to give Whedon half a season to prove the concept. An impossible task, surely, in a culture that was not really susceptible to such a show.
Okay, this is where I have a problem. See, because we're talking about vampires. We're having a talk with vampires in it.
Isn't that what we saw last night?
Xander represents us, those who refuse to accept that the supernatural exists. The people of Sunnydale, we are shown, are so trapped in the rationality of the old world, the world that discards the supernatural, that they are unable to accept reality as it is. Not just reality. People in the rock and roll period didn't like to see supernatural stuff on TV shows either, and regarded it as silly nonsense. But some of them were willing to accept it as metaphors for reality. And so, they were willing to accept the premise of the show, and realize that the rational one here is Willow, who believes her eyes over what she was told by society. Xander has to concede, along with us viewers. Once we accept that vampires are real, we quickly learn that witchcraft is real, that monsters are real, that possession is real, and who knows what else. Giles promises us that there's a lot more, and by mid-season we are eager to find out, and find out how they will make them represent youth problems. The show will not disappoint, and will quickly establish itself as a hit. Without anyone realizing yet, it was laying the ground for the cyber period, in which the supernatural will find its way into the mainstream once again. This, however, is just the tip of the iceberg. The show was bringing a much deeper evolution to television. Not so much in season 1, but the seeds are already there. Before the 90s, there were basically two types of TV series. Most were episodic, meaning that they had a regular cast of characters, and every episode was kind of a short movie in which those characters would act. There were rarely any ramifications that extended beyond that particular episode, and there was very little growth of character. Instead, the point was to create characters that would become cultural icons, that people would want to sit and watch every week doing essentially the same thing. Their thing. The other type was the serial shows, mainly soap operas, that were a continuous, never-ending story, with many intertwining plots, and many characters that would come and go. The soap operas intended mainly to create emotional stories and dramatic scenes, and generally didn't have any deeper messages. Another type of serial show was the miniseries, which told a story with a beginning and an ending, over a predetermined number of episodes. They could go deeper, but the weakness of the miniseries is that it didn't utilize the main advantage of the medium of television, which is its ability to be more like everyday reality, that doesn't have a predetermined end. The first to truly break the mold was Maverick film director David Lynch, who decided to treat television as an art form and create a soap opera with unique style and deeper meanings. Twin Peaks premiered in 1990 and became a cultural sensation for a while, suggesting new possibilities for TV. But Lynch failed to get the TV executives to change their old ways of thinking, eventually leading him to quit in frustration, and the show was cancelled after 2 short seasons. We shall talk about Twin Peaks in more detail in the future. It may have failed, but it opened the door to other shows, like Babylon 5 and The X-Files, mid-90s series that had a longer run, and presented a hybrid in which every episode stood on its own as a self-contained story, but also strung together with the other episodes to create a bigger story. Buffy the Vampire Slayer took this new format to the next level. By making it a high school show, it could deal with issues of youth culture, and thus with the main social issues and philosophical questions that plagued the rock and roll period. High school shows proliferated in the 90s. It started with the cinema of the 80s, when 50s rock and roll youth got old enough to start making movies about rebellious kids. It carried on into 90s television, but it was still old television, meaning episodic shows like Saved by the Bell, or soap operas like Beverly Hills 90210. The latter was actually one of the biggest symbols of 90s culture, and some claim that it rivaled Buffy to the crown of the best youth show of the decade. I never watched it, but recently, to prepare for this project, I watched a few episodes and was surprised by how bad it was. The acting is wooden, the characters stereotypical, the plot predictable, the dialogue trite, the tone didactic and aiming to teach us how to be good boys and girls, and the messaging very on the nose. These shows are mere nostalgia now. Buffy still lives. And this is because, first of all, the show still succeeds by all the metrics of old television. Every episode is a tight and well-made story, it has snappy humor and top-notch drama, and most of all, it gives us an icon. Several icons, in fact, but one of them towers above the rest. Pop culture had never seen a girl like Buffy. Sure, there were chicks who kicked ass on film before, like Ellen Ripley or Sarah Connor, but they had to become masculine in order to do so. Buffy was a girly girl, feminine in every way in her social interactions, but a fierce warrior when fighting demons. Sarah Michelle Gellar, with her cute and expressive face, her athletic body, her martial arts training, and her stupendous acting skills, makes it all work, makes us believe that one girl can contain all of these facets. She can break our heart with her emotional turmoil, make us laugh with her snarky remarks and perfect comic timing, entice us with her hotness, thrill us with her powerful warrior presence and killer moves, smite us with her cool demeanor and crafty quips, and dazzle us with her fashion sense. Ah yes, fashion. Fashion is very important to Buffy.
What do you know about this town?
It's 2 hours in the freeway from Neiman Marcus.
Style was everything in the rock and roll period. Buffy is to the 90s what Emma Peel was to the 60s, Jill Monroe to the 70s, and Daisy Duke to the 80s, chicks who all found time to be fashion icons as they were kicking ass. They didn't kick ass nearly as much as Buffy, but on the other hand, she never matched them in her effect on fashion. This is because the rock and roll period, in which clothes were such an important part of identity, was coming to an end. But she desperately wants to be like them, constantly worried that her Slayer life is cramping her style, making her lose her fashion sense. Early on, as she prepares for her very first night at the Bronze, we see her feeling like all of her dresses make her look either too promiscuous or too demure.
Hi, I'm an enormous slut. Hello, would you like a copy of The Watchtower? I used to be so good at this.
In the early 2010s, dilettante feminist culture critic Anita Sarkeesian moaned about how female action heroes of that period seemed preoccupied with what to wear, instead of how to fight. This is the outcome of not studying the period you are talking about, and judging things by your own period sensibilities. In the cyber period, our identities are virtual, and don't wear clothes, so fashion is not that important. In the rock and roll period, it was all about doing it with style, and practicality could be somewhat sacrificed in the process. The fact that Buffy goes out slaying in stylish dresses and stilettos might look silly to the audience of today, but back then, it only made her more badass, more iconic. She's in the pantheon of TV icons of the period, in the front line with Captain Kirk, the Fonz, Al Bundy, and a few others. She became an almost immediate sensation, making us want to come back every week to watch her do her thing. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, then, succeeds by the parameters of old television, but, almost unnoticeable at first, it already plants the seeds for the new television. First of all, it introduces what is arguably television's first big bad, the Master, and he is delightful. We shall leave the discussion of the Master and the concept of Big Bad to another time. Secondly, these early episodes introduce a plot device in which every episode ends with a little twist that bodes ill for the future. In this first season, it went nowhere. The episode 4 ending was never revisited. Those of episodes 3 and 6 would get fun callbacks but nothing more, and only episode 5's surprise ending, the realization that the Anointed One is actually the little boy, would have consequences, and even they were anticlimactic. This still feels like old TV, and the endings serve only to remind us that evil is never completely defeated. But in later seasons, this plot device would be masterfully employed to great effect. More importantly, we are already beginning to see growth of character. In the rock and roll period, there was a clear line between the world of youth and the world of adults, and youth heroes either remained kids forever or stopped being heroes once they grew up. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a coming-of-age story, where the heroes start out as kids but grow into the adult world. So while Buffy seemed at first to be an action TV icon like the Lone Ranger, Wonder Woman and MacGyver, she will prove to be a much more complex character than them, as she constantly grows and changes. This connects the show to the tradition of Bildung novels, one of the pillars of modern literature. We discussed how the modern age believed that man has to grow through history until he becomes actualized and is able to devise the perfect human society. The modern individual was seen as having to go through a similar process. Previous literary heroes were basically already presented as a fully developed character, but heroes of Bildung novels, starting from Goethe's 1795's Wilhelm Meister, started out as young adults around the age of 20, and had to develop character before they became men. The rock and roll period, focused on teenagers, made its heroes even younger, and often never showed them becoming adults. While the modern age was all about actualizing, the rock and roll kids didn't want to actualize, and preferred to remain in an undetermined state, perceived as fear. Adulthood basically meant death. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a new world. The mentality of the rock and roll period is here presented by the vampires, those who never grow old and remain stuck in the same age, and it is presented as a bad mentality. Our hero slays vampires, which metaphorically means that she slays these inner demons that prevent her from maturing. She begins her hero journey at age 15, like Peter Parker, but while Peter Parker somehow remained 15 for decades, we shall see Buffy growing and maturing. Her struggles to become a better Slayer are a metaphor for her struggles to become a better and stronger woman. In Bildung novels, the hero usually has an older mentor to guide them. The rock and roll period, on the other hand, tended to show the young heroes as left to their own devices, and having to fight by themselves, because all the adults around them were clueless. You're probably thinking, what about Obi-Wan and Yoda, who guide the 15-year-old Luke Skywalker towards actualization? True, but Star Wars does not exist in the reality of the rock and roll period, and is clearly influenced by 19th century epics. It also has a strong Oriental influence, and the idea of a mentor remains strong in Oriental culture even in the rock and roll period. But Western heroes of the period did not have a mentor. All the characters may help our hero, like Doc helps Marty McFly, but don't guide them. The cyber period, starting with Buffy and Giles, took the youthful heroes of the previous period and gave them a mentor, to guide them towards adulthood. How is this coming-of-age story told? Well, in every section, we will see Buffy developing part of her character and identity. And there will always be a double, a foil, someone who fails to grow like she does. Here, this foil is Cordelia. Cordelia exhibits no growth at all in this section, remaining a one-dimensional character. She is the stereotypical queen bee, caring only about herself, about being the most popular girl in school, dating the hottest boys, and becoming the head cheerleader. Buffy, in this section, must learn to overcome the Cordelia inside her. She realizes that she has a duty to protect others, which means that she must sacrifice her own high school dreams. We watch as she sacrifices her social status, her cheerleading, and her chances with the boy that she fancies. It never comes without a struggle, but eventually she always puts the well-being of others above her selfish needs. Willow and Xander also grow, although their growth process, throughout the show, will be flawed. The moment they realize what Buffy is, they offer to help. Their initial name is...
You guys don't have to get involved.
What do you mean? We're a team. Aren't we a team?
Yeah, you're the Slayer and we're like the Slayerettes.
I avoided using the more famous name of our team, because they don't use it as of now. Also, they are not really a team yet. They are Buffy's sidekicks, and need to grow to become real teammates. Willow starts out as already highly intelligent and capable, but hugely insecure and awkward in her social interactions. Being a Slayerette gives her purpose, allowing her to put her skills to practical use, and she grows in confidence. Alison Hannigan is unmatched in her ability to infuse quirkiness and cuteness into everything that she does, making us root for her, making many viewers identify with her more than with any other character. By episode 2, she already gains the courage to stand up to Cordelia, and by episode 6 she completes this part of her growth, and we see her combine her intelligence with some savvy and courage as she tricks Hyena Xander into revealing his true face. Then again, in this episode we also see her thinking that Xander's change in behavior towards her is due to something wrong with her. This feeling of being undesirable and undeserving will continue to haunt Willow, as she fails to outgrow it. Xander doesn't have much in the department of brains, but he does have a heart. He genuinely cares for his friends, and he wants to fight the good fight. But he has many character flaws that he has to overcome.
So what's the plan? We saddle up, right?
There's no we, okay? I'm the Slayer, and you're not.
I knew you'd throw that back in my face.
Xander, this is deeply dangerous.
I'm inadequate. That's fine. I'm less than a man.
Xander is established right away as a beta male who would like to be alpha and struggles to live up to ideals of masculinity. At the same time, he represents the guy who has to get used to the new world, a world in which women are empowered. Reportedly, Joss Whedon put a lot of himself into the character of Xander. The drive to prove his masculinity, in this section, leads him to do foolish things, but he grows through the experience. Xander is victimized more than any other character on the show, but he perseveres and becomes stronger. Figuratively, this is shown by him occasionally picking up the powers that supernaturally possess him. He gradually learns to accept his role as Buffy's sidekick and finds his place in the group. By the beginning of episode 6, he is already confident enough to go deal with a gang of bullies on his own, and in that, he saves Buffy from being possessed by Hyena. Unfortunately, he gets possessed himself, but this seems to endow him with the aggressive edge he was lacking. Once freed, he immediately springs to save Willow, the first time we see him actually fight. From here on, he will take part in the physical fighting and continue to grow in confidence. Like Willow, however, there are sides to Xander that he fails to deal with.
Get off of me.
Is that what you really want? We both know what you really want. You want danger, don't you? You like your men dangerous.
You're in trouble, Xander. You are infected with some hyena thing. It's like a demonic possession.
Dangerous and mean, right? Like Angel, your mystery guy. Well, guess who just got mean? Do you know how long I've waited until you stop pretending that we aren't attracted?
This is Hyena Xander, but the things he says come from his human subconscious. We learn that he believes Buffy is attracted to him, and the only reason she doesn't want him is because he isn't mean enough. A lot of nice guys harbor a certain frustration and hostility towards women, who seem to have a tendency to annoyingly be attracted to assholes. But they can be attracted to nice guys as well, and if they are not attracted to you, your being nice is not the reason. Besides, this is not the case with Buffy, and the fact that Xander thinks so is one of the most jarring flaws in his personality. Buffy, at the end of the episode, chooses to pretend like it never happened, probably thinking that boys will be boys, and this is how boys are. It's not. Pretty much all boys want you if you're this hot, but they don't all delude themselves that you want them back. Not confronting Xander about it only leaves it to fester. He will never get over it, and will always have this animosity towards Buffy, causing him to lash out at her whenever the opportunity comes. The two adults in Buffy's life, Giles and Joyce, also have some growing to do in their approach towards the troubled girl. Joyce can be annoying on first watch, but on rewatches, when you are more open to see it from her perspective, you feel for her. The woman had her life ruined due to Buffy, and she still does her best to be a good mother, but she can't understand why the sweet girl that she puts so much effort into raising the right way is such a juvenile delinquent. At the same time, she shows real strength, building up a new life, while practically acting as a single parent to a very problematic kid. You begin to see where Buffy gets her strong character from. So while she might be annoying on first watch,
No.
Mom?
The tapes all say I should get used to saying it. No.
Yeah, we expect our parents to give us the parenting that we need, not go by what the tapes tell them. We, the viewers, know how off the mark she is here. But on second watch, we remember that it's not her fault, because she is completely in the dark about what her daughter needs. Until she finds out what's really up with Buffy, Joyce cannot and will not do much growing as a character. Giles, meanwhile, comes in expecting Buffy to be focused on her mission, but has to deal with a girl who insists on having a life beyond slaying. We see him slowly adjusting to her ways, finding his place in the new world. By the end of episode 6, we can say that our core group of Buffy, Willow, Xander and Giles has indeed gelled into a team where everyone has a role to play, a team with backbone, courage, and true friendship. Then there's another older character, who calls himself Angel, and acts like a guardian angel to Buffy. Angel is a mysterious presence in this section, and the main interest in his character is that we feel the heat growing between them. In episode 6, Buffy admits to Willow that she's into him, but complains he's never around. We feel like the show is priming us up for something, but we don't know what, yet. Those who are used to watching the new, post-Buffy television often guess what is about to be revealed, but we were not prepared for it at the time. Another way in which the show is the new world is of course the focus on powerful women. We are brought into it right in the opening scene, where we expect the boy to be the creep, based on our past horror-watching experience, but Darla's shocking turn warns us that this show is going to be different. In this section, not just the hero, but also the villains are female. Vamp Darla is a force in the pilot, and Catherine the Witch is the scary villain of the next episode. After these two classic female horror tropes, we go into the animal kingdom for our monsters of the week. The praying mantis is an animal in which the female is the scary sex, and hyena groups are matriarchal in nature. The focus of the hyena episode is on Xander, so the matriarchal aspect is downplayed, but it is still quite unique that the bully gang also contains girls, who are equal to the boys. It is actually the girls who lead the attack on Principal Flutie. In episode 5, we mix things up a bit, and the twist is not that the villain is a woman, but a child. Still, Emily Dickinson serves as a bad influence. The villains, then, are quite original. Even so, they are not welcoming of the new world. The villainy often comes from wanting to bring back the old world, in which Catherine wants to relive the life she had before she became an adult woman. In the pack, the wicked zookeeper belongs to a cult of people who believe that humanity is a regression and want to go back to an animalistic state. And the vampires in the Master's Court call themselves the Old Ones and want to bring things back to the time when the demons ruled the earth. The collective memory of the vampires doesn't extend that far back, though. They actually have a medieval mindset that believes in fate that cannot be changed and can be foretold by prophecy. The Master relies on a prophecy that says he will rule again, and is certain it will come true. They are shown as a feudal society, where there is a clear hierarchy, and warriors assemble together in orders. How can our heroes fight such an evil? Well, in the epics of the Middle Ages, the heroes were extraordinary people, often superhuman in their abilities, who dedicated their life to being a warrior, and fought back supernatural monsters that threatened the land. Buffy is expected by the vampires to be this type of hero, but she refuses to play by these rules. Things have changed since medieval times. First, there was the modern age, that was about man taking his fate into his own hands, whether as an individual carving their own destiny, or as a universal humanity that progresses towards creating a better world for itself. Giles has this mindset, and he believes they can thwart the prophecies in the Master's books, and must dedicate themselves to this task. But Buffy already represents an even newer mindset. The modern age believed that the world we live in now is a bad one that should be fixed, so modern heroes gladly gave up on their regular lives for a more heroic existence, fighting for a better tomorrow. The pop age is born from the feeling that our world is already good enough, and we should focus on ways to make our daily lives even more joyous and exciting. Buffy doesn't want to give up on her everyday life. She wants to be part of youth culture and experience it in full. This, we and the monsters will find out throughout the show, is actually what makes her stronger than previous Slayers, who played by the old rules. She's not the first hero with this mindset, of course. Since it had this mindset, the Pop Age came up with a new kind of hero that it calls the superhero. The superhero is unique in that they live a double life. They are part of daily existence in our contemporary society, but they also fight the monsters that walk among us, existing in a secret realm that we are unaware of. Thus, the superhero can continue to enjoy life in the Pop Age, while at the same time heroically fighting to defend it against those who threaten to kill the fun. Buffy, as Xander is quick to pick up on, is this kind of hero.
It's cool, Buffy's a superhero.
But it isn't that simple. Part of the myth of superheroes is that they are required to make huge sacrifices when it comes to their private lives. Buffy, existing in the rich pop culture of the 90s, wants nothing more than to be part of it, and finds the sacrifices that a superhero life demands to be too much.
And secondly, I'm retired. Hey, I know. Why don't you kill him?
I'm a watcher. I haven't the skill.
Oh, come on. Stake through the heart, a little sunlight. It's like falling off a log.
A slayer slays, a watcher...
Watches?
Yes, no. He trains her. He prepares her.
Prepares me for what? For getting kicked out of school? For losing all of my friends? For having to spend all of my time fighting for my life and never getting to tell anyone because I might endanger them? Go ahead. Prepare me.
This is the first scene with real emotional gravitas, and the acting here already puts it miles above contemporary high school shows like Beverly Hills 90210 and Saved by the Bell. In a previous discussion, we noted that Buffy is part of the slew of chosen one heroes that came in the late 90s, like Neo, Anakin, and Harry Potter. But those heroes hated their everyday existence, and were happy to find they had another calling. We, like Giles, come into the show expecting Buffy to be one of those heroes, but it suddenly dawns on Giles how cruel what he is asking of Buffy is, how much she has to give up. But one nagging thought we are already beginning to have is that it doesn't necessarily have to be this hard. One thing that Buffy says there doesn't make much sense, and will continue to not make sense.
If your identity as a Slayer is revealed, it could put you and all those around you in grave danger.
Why? The idea of keeping your identity secret makes sense for superheroes who wear masks. And they keep it secret because they don't want the villains to know their everyday identity and come after their loved ones. But Buffy's everyday identity is known to the villains. The Master and his minions know exactly who she is, who her friends are, and where she lives. So what is the point of keeping her identity secret? In the same episode, not knowing who Buffy is puts Owen in danger. In the coming episode, we will see Joyce put in danger for not knowing about vampires, and this will be a recurring motif. Maybe it made sense in the past, when Slayers were detached from society, but if Buffy is intent on being part of the everyday world, then it is foolish to keep her Slayer identity a secret from those close to her. They do it because they grew up in the Pop Age, so they know it is expected from a superhero. There is no other reason behind it. Then again, when Buffy fights for her right to maintain a social life, she does rely on superhero mythology to justify it.
Buffy, maintaining a normal social life as a Slayer, it's problematic at best.
This is the 90s, the 1990s in point of fact, and I can do both. Clark Kent has a job. I just want to go on a date.
Very girl power, but Buffy finds out that she can't really have it all. Although she keeps defying Giles in every episode, and tries her best to have a regular social life, she does eventually make a lot of sacrifices in this section. Her girl power, here, is manifested mainly through working with Giles to develop her Slayer skills. Then again, it's all figurative. The challenges she faces as the Slayer are metaphors for the challenges a teenage girl faces, and overcoming them also makes her better and stronger in the social realm. Not everything is sacrificed, though. Buffy does find time to partake in the youth culture and pop culture of the 90s. And here, too, we are welcomed to a new world, because within the pop age, this was the beginning of the transitional phase to the cyber period, to an entirely different pop culture. For now, it is hardly noticeable. It is broadcast in early 1997, and the events actually take place in 1996, so we are still dwelling in the rock and roll period, trying to work out its challenges. But we already feel the decline. To be clear, when I talk of rock and roll, I talk not only about the 50s musical style, but about all the styles that came in its wake. What they all had in common was that they were the sound of youth coming out of their shell, finding a way to express what they feel inside. But to culture guardians, those who believe kids should be taught to conform, it sounded differently. Even into the 90s, rock and roll was still considered the beast from the id that threatens conformed society, the sound of youth in revolt. High school movies were usually about kids breaking out against the repression of the educational system, in order to have some rock and roll fueled fun. This was particularly true in the 80s, when the conservatives were in power and trying to bring back the conformist values of the early 50s, before rock and roll. Meanwhile, on television, there were hardly any shows that dealt with rock and roll, considered too subversive. But in 1992, Bill Clinton rode into the White House on the wings of rock and roll music, bringing in the lax liberalism of the 60s, and ushering in a decade that was mostly about having fun. Buffy the Vampire Slayer premiered as Clinton was beginning his second term, when rock and roll was seen as the positive force that brought us this good life. With the exception of episode 3, we visit the Bronze in every episode, experiencing different aspects of what the music meant to youth culture. In Welcome to the Hellmouth, it's a background for socializing. In The Harvest, it's the sound of badassery. In Witch, of youth virility. In Teacher's Pet, of masculine prowess. In Never Kill a Boy on the First Date, it's the soundtrack of teen romance. And in The Pack, it symbolizes group mentality. But there's no youth rebellion. With rock and roll thus defanged, another medium of pop culture was needed to give the show its bite, and horror was the ticket. Horror, too, was considered too much for the average television viewer, and was rare on TV. This show took these two prodigal sons, rock and roll and horror, and successfully married them to create a new type of TV experience. The positive aspects of this merger will be fully explored in the gothic grandeurs of Season 2, while in Season 1, horror is used mainly to expose the dark sides of youth rebellion, the dark sides of coming out of your shell, the dark sides of the mindset of the rock and roll period. In the 50s, horror youth flicks showed rebellious teenagers falling into the hands of unscrupulous scientists, who ran experiments on them and turned them into monsters. These films expressed the fear of science that set in after the explosion of the atomic bomb. The show, in this section, goes back to the formula of bad adults taking advantage of naive youth, but here it is mainly to show how the things celebrated in the rock and roll period, which were described as setting the youth free, can actually lead to horrific results. In the pilot, the vampires are metaphors for creeps who come and prey on youth who carelessly hook up in a club. Witch is a metaphor for how the celebration of youth is causing some parents to use their children to vicariously relive their high school years. In Teacher's Pet, the mantis is a metaphor for a predatory teacher, exploiting youth's obsession with losing their virginity. And in The Pack, the hyena metaphor is for bullying and peer pressure, and the evil adult is the zookeeper, who can be seen as a metaphor for charismatic populists who exploit the youth's rebellious group mentality to gain personal power. The kids, unlike what we got used to since the 50s, are depicted as not having the power to fight back against these adults, and needing the Slayer to come save them. Deeper still, the show deals with the dark sides of Clinton's America, the America that was the result of the victory of the mindset of the rock and roll period. After all the decades of youth revolt against authority, some parts of America were in anarchy, and where there's anarchy, there's violence. The show depicts America as teetering on top of a hellmouth that threatens to swallow it at any moment. The youth need guidance, and rock and roll no longer provides that guidance. Can the school system put us back on the right path? As Buffy joins Sunnydale High, the approach towards the students is dictated by Principal Flutie, who believes, at least declaratively, in a liberal, lenient approach.
Buffy, don't worry. Any other school, they might say, "What's your step?" or "We'll be watching you." But that's just not the way here. We want to service your needs and help you to respect our needs. And if your needs and our needs don't mesh...
Flutie sounds at first like a liberal who wants to give the students the freedom to develop, but he is actually a progressive. I am using this term here in the way that it is usually being used nowadays, meaning a progressive is someone who still believes in the defunct modern ideal of progress towards a perfect society, and believes that they know exactly how to get there. Inherent to progressive thinking is the belief that the nature of humans is good, so if we just create the right environment, i.e. the environment that the progressive determines is the right one, they will behave well. Flutie seemingly allows Buffy to choose her way, but threatens her that if her way doesn't mesh with the system he imposes, then it basically means that she is not acting according to her nature, and will have to be corrected. This is the hypocrisy at the basis of progressive thinking. It pretends to give freedom to people, but it is actually authoritarian.
You have to see a counselor. Everyone who saw the body has to see a crisis counselor.
But I really don't...
We all need help with our feelings. Otherwise, we bottle them up, and before you know it, powerful laxatives are involved. I really believe if we all reach out to one another, we can beat this thing. I'm always here if you need a hug, but not a real hug, because there's no touching this. We're sensitive to wrong touching.
But I really...
No. You have to talk to a counselor and start the healing. You have to heal.
No, Mr. Flutie, I don't...
Heal.
This dual meaning of heal is a perfect pun to encapsulate this hypocrisy. Progressives believe that they know what's best for people, better than they do. They know how to heal society's problems, if only us peasants listen to them. And if we don't, we have to be brought to heal. They see no point in encouraging people to develop their individuality and try to direct it in enlightened ways. Instead, they create the environment they believe will lead to enlightenment, and just let people run wild in it, believing that in time, this environment will affect them to act according to their benign nature. But the show is against this approach, and Flutie is shown as a failure, who ends up lashing out at the students who fail to act according to his plan. His approach doesn't lead students to become more enlightened, but leaves them slaves to their own violent impulses. They eventually eat him alive. The show does present a better alternative. Dr. Gregory is attuned to the personal needs of his students, trying to find a way to guide them. He is firm with Buffy, reprimands her for her slacking, but also encourages her to develop her individual skills, and makes her believe that she can do better. This, the show is telling us, is the right approach. Alas, because this is not the approach of the educational system, which is either too progressive or too conservative, the kids grow up violent, and teachers like Gregory also end up getting eaten alive. The educational system, then, fails to give us guidance, and the mediums of the rock and roll period, which guided the spirit to great things for several decades, are now in decline. What can guide us, then? When Buffy is outcast from the cool crowd, she rotates towards the nerds, and finds out that there's another world out there. Early in episode 3, we get a scene that introduces everyone's geeky interests. Giles is a book nerd, and interested mainly in the supernatural.
But that's the thrill of living on the Hellmouth. There's a veritable cornucopia of fiends and devils and ghouls to engage.
Willow is a science and computers nerd.
That means hacking illegally into the school's computer system. At last, something I can do.
And Xander is a comic book nerd.
So maybe Amber's got this power to make herself be on fire. It's like the Human Torch, only it hurts.
Buffy comes from a different world, but she does know enough to be able to connect with them. She does know something about science.
Sean, can you tell me why these chemicals have this reaction?
She does understand something about the supernatural.
Are you Amy?
I don't understand.
She switched. She switched your bodies, didn't she?
And she is somewhat familiar with the comic book world.
So it's not her. The test was positive. She's our Sabrina.
In the coming seasons, Buffy will combine the feisty spirit of the rock and roll period with this nerdy knowledge to face the challenges that the cyber period throws her way. In that, she will become a mentor to us all.